Okay, so what can affect the air flowing into the lungs? So resistance, they call it resistance to airflow, or factors that affect the exchange of gases. So the first thing is pulmonary compliance. So basically that means how easily your lungs and your thoracic cavity can expand. Okay, so as you age, as if you're obese, there are all sorts of things that can affect the ability of your thoracic cavity to get bigger. So it the let's see. So pulmonary fibrosis, if you have scarring in your lungs, okay, the lungs are not going to be elastic. If you're really heavy, okay, it can put pressure on your lungs, so it takes a lot more energy to expand your thoracic cavity. As we age, things become less elastic. So there's just all sorts of things that can affect that, and we'll talk about that more. Okay, now another thing is the size of the bronchioles. Okay, so now remember the bronchioles have smooth muscle in them. Okay, so this smooth muscle can constrict or dilate. Okay, so this is how we control whether air can go in or not. Okay, so if something constricts, it could be because you inhaled something. Okay, so you inhale something and the bronchioles constrict so that you don't get any more of it into your lungs. Okay, cold air can cause them to constrict. Histamine can cause bronchoconstriction, and then the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates them to constrict. Okay, dilation. Okay, so we're making the bronchioles big, so the sympathetic nervous system makes them bigger. Epinephrine will make them bigger. Okay, so that's the second thing. Okay, now the third thing is alveolar surface tension, and I already talked about this. Okay, so here's the alveoli, and inside them, I could make this like this. Okay, so inside here, it's covered with water. Okay, that thin film of water, it needs to be there. It has to be there for gas exchange, okay, for the gases to dissolve and be transported. However, the surface tension inside the alveoli can be high, so that the alveoli can actually stick together. So these cells, the type 2 cells, or the great alveolar cells, release the surfactant, which is the detergent. And I already mentioned this acute respiratory distress syndrome of premature infants. So before 8 months gestation, babies do not have developed type 2 cells, so they can't make the surfactant. Okay, now alveolar gas exchange. So how do we talk about it? Okay, so this should be 150. That's weird. 150. Okay, so the conducting division of the respiratory pathway is considered dead space because there's no gas exchange. Okay, and that's about 150 milliliters. Okay, now we can have physiologic dead space, which is any pathological alveolar, like disease or something else that damages the alveoli. Okay, and so gas exchange doesn't occur on either of these, so that affects how much oxygen you can actually get to the blood. Okay, now the alveolar ventilation rate is the air that actually ventilates the alveoli, so what gets in the alveoli times the respiratory rate. Okay, so that's going to tell you how much gas you can get to the tissue. Okay, now we're going to do this in lab. So this is part of a lab we call spirometry. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to measure these volumes, and then from the volumes you can calculate capacities. Okay, so volumes are what you measure, and then capacities are volumes added together. Okay, so So here's an example. So when you're taking a normal, easy breath, okay, the volume of air that you're inhaling and exhaling is called the tidal volume. Okay, so that's a normal, quiet breath. So it's coming in and out. When you go to inhale and take a deep breath, okay, this is called the IRV, or the inspiratory reserve volume. So that's the extra that you can bring in. Okay, the extra that you can blow out is called the expiratory reserve volume. And then there's always a little bit left in your lungs that you can't blow out no matter what. Once you're alive, you have this volume, and it's called the residual volume. Usually say it's about 1 liter. Okay, now vital capacity is everything, so the IRV, TV, and ERV added together. Okay, and that's vital capacity, so that's how much you have to live. Okay, and then total lung capacity is everything. You're going to do a whole lab on this, so you'll know these from lab, so you need to know them, and you'll learn them in detail in lab. Okay, now, things that affect this. Okay, so age. So as we get older, things become less elastic and our muscles weaken. Okay, if you exercise, okay, your respiratory muscles are going to be strong, so you'll have a good capacity. Your body size is proportional to your tidal volumes and things like that. So a person who is big has big lungs, so they should be able to hold more air. Okay, restrictive disorders and restrictive disorders. So restrictive disorders affect compliance, so the ability of the lungs to expand. And then obstructive disorders interfere with the airflow. Okay, so it's hard to blow the air out. Okay, and lots of times you're not able to get the air out if you have a COPD. The air is stuck in your lungs. Okay, now how does your brain control ventilation? Okay, so it's repetitive stimuli. Okay, so I think of it as kind of like sonar. Okay, now the neurons are found in the medulla oblongata and the pons. Okay, so that's going to control your normal unconscious breathing. So it's kind of like you don't have to think about it. It's going to happen. All right, now voluntary control. So like if you're blowing out the birthday candles. Okay, that goes to your motor cortex, so that's higher order. Or you're singing or whatever, yelling. Okay, what did I write? Birth. I don't know what I was writing there. Okay, so motor cortex. Okay, now, there are 2 kinds of neurons in the medulla oblongata. Okay, there are inspiratory neurons and there's expiratory neurons. Okay, so inspiration is you're going to inhale, right? Expiration is you're going to exhale. Okay, so the inspiratory neurons fire, so like bing, 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 during inspiration. And then the expiratory neurons only fire during forced expiration. Okay, now the path of the neurons, so the fibers go from the brain, from the brainstem down the spinal cord to lower motor neurons. Okay, and they're going to go to the diaphragm and the intercostal nerves. Okay, now here's more details. Okay, so the medulla oblongata, okay, has 2 respiratory groups, so 2 parts of it that are respiratory groups. So one is the ventral. So the ventral is going to be on the front, and one is the dorsal. Okay, so we call the ventral the VRG, okay, and we call the dorsal the DRG. Okay, now, the VRG, it's the one that does most of the work. Okay, so it's going to inhale and exhale. Okay, so basically what happens is the inspiratory neurons are turned on for 2 seconds. Okay, so 1, 2. Okay, and then the expiratory are turned on for 3 seconds. So let's do 1, 2, 3. So stop. Okay, and they're going to inhibit the inspiratory. So basically what's happening is we're going 1, 2, inhale, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Okay, so inhale, inhale, 1, 2, 3, exhale. Okay, so that, and if you listen to someone breathing when they're normal breathing, you can see that same, like that 5-second pattern. So inhale for 2, exhale for 3. Inhale for 2, exhale for 3. And it's all coming from this ventral respiratory group in the medulla oblongata. Okay, the dorsal group, all it is it's a relay station, so it's just like the message just passes through the dorsal group. Okay, now the pons has, they call it the pontine respiratory group. And basically what it does is it's just going to smooth the transition between inspiration and expiration. So you're not gasping in between. Okay, so respiration rate for normal quiet breathing is called eupnea. Okay, so we average about 12 to 15 breaths per minute. Okay, and the tidal volume is about 500 milliliters. Okay, so dyspnea doesn't have that pattern. Okay, and apnea means it stops at some point in time, like sleep apnea. All right, so here's a picture, and I don't want you don't have to memorize this picture, okay, but I wanted you to see the medulla oblongata and the pons. Okay, so here's the medulla oblongata, there's the pons, okay, and the message is going to come out from here. Okay, there's a lot in this image, so don't worry about it too much. Okay, now, how do we regulate what's going on? How do we regulate our breath? Okay, so we have connections coming into the brainstem. Okay, so we get input from the limbic system. Okay, and we get input from the hypothalamus. Okay, so those are going to transfer pain and emotional connections to your breathing. So like if you get worked up and you're scared, okay, and you start to cry, all right, so that's that input. Okay, now we also have input from chemoreceptors. Okay, now there are chemoreceptors on the medulla oblongata, okay, and in the big arteries like the aorta. Okay, and what they monitor is they're going to monitor blood pH, blood carbon dioxide, and blood CO2. Okay, so if these levels get out of homeostasis, we can alter our respiratory rate. Okay, so this is the big thing. All right, now input from airways and lungs. So if you inhale something, you can have the vagus nerve goes to the message to the medulla, okay, and we can have bronchoconstriction or we can start to cough. Okay, we also have an inflation reflex, so we can't blow our lungs up. Okay, so baroreceptors will go off and it'll say, okay, you need to stop, and that'll do it. Okay, now voluntary control. This is kind of the same thing. Okay, so neural pathways. So the motor cortex of the frontal lobe sends impulses down the corticospinal tracts to respiratory neurons in the spinal cord. So it'll bypass the brainstem. So it'll override the automatic inspiration and expiration. Okay, now there's limits on voluntary control. So think about a kid that holds its breath until they pass out. Okay, so blood, carbon dioxide, and oxygen can cause you to pass out, and then you're automatically going to start breathing again. So you can't kill yourself that way. Okay, then Ondine's curse. Ondine's curse it's based on Greek mythology, where I can't remember the whole story, but the moral of the story is something is damaged in your medulla oblongata, and you'd have to remember to breathe. So these people usually, they would die when they fall asleep. So then they don't sleep, and then they get crazy. So no big deal.